The boardroom on the 31st floor of Hartwell Capital went silent the moment Diane Ashby walked in. Not the polite, expectant quiet of people waiting for a meeting to begin. The other kind. The kind that happens when everyone in the room has already decided something is about to go wrong, and they just don't know for whom. Diane's heels clicked against marble that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. She moved to the head of the table without acknowledging anyone, set down her leather portfolio, and looked at the man standing near the window with his back half turned toward the room. He was wearing a gray work shirt with the building's maintenance logo stitched above the pocket. His name was Eli Bowen, and he was 40 minutes late. "Mr. Bowen." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Close the door, please." He did. "Do you know what this meeting is about?" Ellie turned fully. He was maybe 40, with the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to talk about them. His eyes were calm in a way that seemed practiced, like a man who had trained himself not to flinch. "I was told you wanted my assessment of the North Tower HVAC system," he said. "The one feeding floors 20 through 35. That assessment was supposed to happen at 8 o'clock this morning." Diane glanced at the clock on the wall. "It is now 8:42. I know. I apologize. I don't need your apology. I need to understand why I have 12 executives in this room who were pulled from their schedules to accommodate a facilities review that didn't happen." Around the table, nobody moved. Gerald Fitch, the CFO, was studying his notepad with great interest. Renata Park, head of operations, had her hands folded on the table and was looking at a spot just above Eli's left shoulder. "There was a situation at my son's school." Eli's voice was quiet. "I had to. That's not something I need to hear." Diane stepped closer. In her heels, she was nearly his height, and she held herself like someone who had fought for every inch of the space she occupied. "What I need is reliability. What I need is for the people working in this building to understand that when we schedule something, we mean it. It doesn't matter what floor you work on." Something moved behind Eli's eyes, not anger. Something older. "I understand," he said. "You're terminated, Mr. Bowen. HR will process your final check. You can collect it Thursday." Nobody in the room breathed. Eli didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just nodded once, the same way a person nods when they've heard something they already knew was coming, pulled his key card from his shirt pocket, set it on the corner of the conference table, and walked toward the door. He had his hand on the handle when Diane said, "I want you to know this is not personal. It's about maintaining standards that apply to everyone in this organization." Ellie looked back at her, just for a moment. There was something in his expression she couldn't name, not contempt, not hurt, something more like recognition, as if he had seen this particular kind of person before and had already made his peace with it. "Have a good morning, Ms. Ashby," he said, and left. The door clicked shut. Diane turned back to the room. "Gerald, let's start with the Q3 variance." She didn't look at the key card on the table. She didn't think about the man who'd set it there. She had a company to run. Eli Bowen took the service elevator down to the ground floor alone. His reflection in the steel doors looked back at him, and he didn't particularly like what he saw. Not because of the job had always been temporary anyway, a place to land after everything else fell apart, something with regular hours and predictable demands. What he didn't like was the exhaustion around his own eyes, the particular weight of a man who keeps getting back up and keeps getting knocked down, and who's starting to wonder if the getting back up is worth the trouble. His phone buzzed, a text from the school. "Reminder, Liam's appointment with the counselor has been moved to Thursday at 3 p.m. Please confirm." He typed back, "Confirmed." Then another, from a number he recognized as Liam's teacher. "He did great in reading group today. Wanted you to know. Thanks for telling me," he wrote. "Means a lot." The lobby of Hartwell Capital was all glass and cold light, and people who moved like they were always late for something important. Eli walked past the security desk, told the guard he was done, and pushed through the revolving door into the Minneapolis morning. November in Minnesota had made up its mind, which November in Minnesota always did. Cold without apology, the sky the color of old concrete. He walked 6 blocks to the bus stop with his hands in his pockets and thought about Liam. Liam was 9. He had his mother's eyes and his father's habit of going quiet when things got hard. 3 years ago, when Dana got sick, Liam had stopped talking for 2 weeks. Not completely, but enough that the school called. Enough that Eli started sleeping on the floor of his son's room because the boy couldn't fall asleep unless someone was nearby. He still slept on the floor sometimes. Some habits didn't break, they just became part of how you lived. The bus came. Eli found a seat and looked out the window at the city moving past. Somewhere in that city, his son was in school learning about fractions and managing the peculiar daily terror of being 9 years old and growing up without a mother. Eli had been late that morning because Liam had woken up at 6:30 with the kind of crying that didn't have a reason, the type that just happened sometimes, especially on cold mornings in November, especially in years that ended in numbers Dana would never see. He'd held his son for 45 minutes. He'd missed the bus. He'd called ahead to say he'd be late and nobody had answered, and by the time he got to Hartwell Capital, his window had already closed. He didn't regret the 45 minutes. He regretted everything else. At home, their apartment on the third floor of a building in the Whittier neighborhood, Eli made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He started looking at listings, building maintenance, overnight security, facility management, anything with steady hours. Anything where he could still be at Liam's school pickup by 3:15. An hour passed. 2. His phone rang. Liam's school. His stomach dropped the way it always did when the school called in the middle of the day, that immediate animal fear before the brain catches up and reminds you to breathe. This is Eli Bowen. Mr. Bowen, this is the school nurse at Garfield Elementary. Liam is fine, she said, because she'd clearly made enough of these calls to know that was the first thing a parent needed to hear. But he had a fall on the playground. He scraped up his knee pretty badly and bumped his head. We'd like you to come in so we can decide together whether he needs to go to urgent care. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He was there in 12. Diane Ashby's afternoon was back-to-back. Budget projections at 1, board prep at 2:30, investor call at 4. She moved through the hours like she always did, efficiently and without sentiment, which was the only way she knew how to move. By 6, she was back at her desk, the city going dark outside her windows, Minneapolis in November doing what it always did, pulling the light away earlier than anyone wanted. Her assistant knocked. Your sister called. She said it's about your niece. Diane paused. Which sister? Colette. Colette was the one who called when things were wrong, not when they were fine. Diane picked up her phone. What happened? B is okay, Colette said, and Diane breathed. But there was an incident after school. Someone tried to grab her near the parking lot. She screamed and some people helped her, but she's at Children's Hospital right now. They want to keep her overnight just to be sure. Bay was 7. She had Colette's stubborn chin and the habit of narrating everything she did out loud, a running commentary on the world that Diane had always secretly found delightful, even when it drove Colette insane. I'm on my way, Diane said. She was out of the office in 4 minutes. The hospital smelled like hospitals always smell, that particular institutional blend of antiseptic and recirculated air, and the unspoken agreement that everyone inside is having a very bad day. Diane found her sister in a waiting area on the second floor, arms crossed, looking like a person who had been managing terror by converting it into pure energy. She's in with the doctor, Colette said. Devon's in there with her. Devon was Colette's husband, a quiet man who coached youth soccer and made very good chili and had loved Bia with an uncomplicated openness that Diane had always admired. Tell me what happened. Colette sat down. Diane sat next to her. Around them, the hospital hummed. A man had approached Bay in the parking lot near the after-school pickup area, Colette said. He'd told her that her mom had sent him. Bea had said no, because Colette had drilled this into her, the same way parents drilled it into kids everywhere now, and thank God she had. When the man grabbed her arm, Bea screamed. 3 people had intervened. A woman named June Torrance who taught at a nearby school, a UPS driver whose name nobody had caught yet, and a man named Eli Bowen who had apparently been dropping his son off for a counseling appointment at a clinic 2 blocks away, heard the screaming and ran. The man had fought back. Eli Bowen had fought harder. The man fled on foot and was as of an hour ago in police custody. Eli Bowen was somewhere in the hospital being treated for a broken wrist and 2 cracked ribs. Diane went very still. What was his name again? Eli Bowen, the police told Devon. They said if he hadn't stepped in when he did, the man would have gotten Bia into the vehicle. Colette's voice broke slightly on the last word, and then she put it back together. He stayed with her until the ambulance came. Bia said he told her knock-knock jokes. Knock-knock jokes. She said he was very bad at them. She said he told her that his son says the same thing. Colette looked at her hands. She asked if she could give him a hug before the paramedics separated them. He let her. Diane sat with that information. I need to find out what room he's in, she said. A nurse pointed her to room 9, down a corridor that smelled of industrial cleaner and something more faintly metallic. The door was partially open. Diane pushed it the rest of the way and stopped. Eli Bowen was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, fully dressed, his right wrist in a temporary splint, a bruise forming along his jaw that would be spectacular by morning. He had a small cut above his eyebrow, butterfly bandage closed. He looked like a man who had been in a fight, which was because he had been. He looked up when she came in. Whatever he was expecting, it wasn't her. Something shifted in his face, not shock, just recalibration. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How is she?" he said. "She's okay. She's going to be okay." Diane stepped into the room. "Because of you." He shook his head slightly, then winced at the motion. "Because she screamed. That's what saved her. I just made sure the guy didn't come back. Mr. Bowen, you don't have to say it. I'd like to." He looked at her then, really looked at her, with those same calm eyes from the conference room. "Okay," he said. "I was wrong this morning. I made a decision without asking questions, and I was wrong." Ellie was quiet. A nurse moved past in the hallway, shoes squeaking on linoleum. "You were late because of your son," Diane said. "It wasn't a question. He had a rough morning." Eli looked at the splint on his wrist. "I couldn't leave him." "Why didn't you say that?" "In the room when I asked." Ellie took a slow breath. "Because you'd already made up your mind. I could see it the second I walked in. And I've learned not to waste words on people who aren't listening." That landed the way it was supposed to. "I would have listened," she said, and she wanted it to be true. But even as she said it, she heard how it sounded, like a thing people said after the fact, when it cost them nothing. Eli seemed to hear it the same way. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. "Can I give you a ride home?" Diane asked. "I can manage. With a broken wrist and cracked ribs in November in Minnesota." A pause. "The buses. I have a car outside." She looked at him steadily. "Let me do this one thing." He studied her face for a long moment. The kind of look that is actually an assessment, a person deciding whether to trust something they have good reason not to trust. "Okay," he said. The car was warm and quiet. Outside, Minneapolis at night moved past in lights and bare trees, and people bundled against a cold that had stopped being polite. They didn't speak until they crossed the river. "You have a son," Diane said. "Liam, he's 9, is he?" She paused, not sure how to ask. "His mother died 3 years ago," Eli said. "Lymphoma. She was 37. Diane looked out the window. "I'm sorry. Yeah," he said it without bitterness, without performance, just acknowledgement, the word worn smooth from use. "It's just us now. Me and him. That's a lot. It's what it is." The car turned onto a street lined with older homes and apartment buildings, the kind of neighborhood that had once been something else and was in the slow process of becoming something new. The driver stopped in front of a 3-story brick building. "This morning," Eli said, not moving yet. "You asked why I didn't explain. I want to give you a real answer." "Okay, because it wasn't just this morning." He turned to look at her. "I've had 3 jobs in 3 years. Every time I try to explain that Liam comes first, that I need certain hours, that I can't always control when things go sideways with a 9-year-old who's grieving, people look at me like I'm making excuses. So I stopped explaining. I just show up early whenever I can and deal with it when I can't." Diane held his gaze. "And when someone doesn't give you the chance to deal with it, then I move on." He reached for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride, Ellie." He stopped. "I want to offer you your job back. Something better than your job. We have an opening in building operations management. Real salary, real benefits, schedule flexibility written into the contract." Eli looked at her in the particular way of someone who has been offered things before and learned what the offer usually costs. "That's not why I helped your niece. I know that. I don't want to be a story you tell yourself to feel better about this morning." The words were calm. They were also a scalpel. "I know," Diane said again, and this time she meant it differently. He got out of the car. At the building's entrance, he turned back. "Tell her, your niece, tell her the joke. The one she'll probably groan at. What joke? Why can't you give Elsa a balloon?" He waited a beat because she'll let it go. Despite everything, despite the whole terrible day, Diane almost laughed. Eli Bowen went inside. She didn't sleep well. She lay in her apartment in the Kenwood neighborhood, in a bedroom with a view of the lake that she had worked for 11 years to afford, and she thought about a man sitting on a hospital bed with a broken wrist and cracked ribs telling knock-knock jokes to a frightened 7-year-old girl. She thought about his face in the conference room, that look of recognition like he had seen her before. She thought about Liam, 9 years old, growing up without his mother, crying on cold November mornings for reasons that didn't need explaining. She thought about herself at 31, her first year as a division head, standing in a conference room not unlike the one on the 31st floor, and a man who'd been in that role for 20 years leaning back in his chair and saying, "You don't actually know what you're doing, do you?" And how she'd gone home and cried in her car for 40 minutes, and then come back the next morning, sharper and harder and more certain than ever that feelings were a liability she couldn't afford. She thought about when she'd started believing that. In the morning, she requested Eli Bowen's personnel file. She read it over coffee. The notes from the hiring manager said, "Applicant overqualified for position, accepted lower pay grade without negotiation." References from a property management firm in St. Paul were glowing and mentioned a family situation requiring adjusted hours. Prior to that, 2 years managing facilities for a hospital system in Wisconsin. Prior to that, a gap the application explained in 2 words: family illness, Dana's illness, and then Dana's death, and then Eli Bowen picking up whatever was available that would let him be home by 3:15. Diane read it twice. Then she sat with it. Her phone buzzed. Her director of operations, Kenneth Fry, asking for approval on a vendor contract. She approved it. Then she called her HR director. "I want to know the details of every termination I've personally authorized in the last 2 years," she said. "Not disciplinary notes. The actual circumstances. I want to know what I didn't ask." There was a pause on the other end. "That's yes. I'll pull those files. Thank you." She hung up and looked at her window at the lake gray and still in the November light. 3 days passed. Eli found work quickly because people with his experience and his steadiness usually did. A property management company in St. Louis Park offered him a facilities coordinator role, better hours than Hartwell Capital, slightly worse pay, further commute. He took it. Liam was doing better. The counselor said he was processing, which was the clinical word for the particular kind of work grief required. He was sleeping more consistently. He'd started drawing again, elaborate comics about a boy and his dog who solved neighborhood mysteries, which the school counselor said was a good sign. "Dad," Liam said one evening over dinner, looking at the splint on his father's wrist with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting to bring something up. "What really happened? I told you. I helped someone who was in trouble. What kind of trouble? A little girl was scared and needed help." Liam was quiet for a moment, turning this over. "How little? 7. That's little." He poked at his macaroni. "Was she okay?" "She's okay now." "Good." Another pause. "Did it hurt?" "Your wrist?" "A little. More than a little." Ellie looked at his son. "Yeah," he said. "More than a little." Liam nodded seriously. "You're brave. I was just there. That's what brave people always say." Liam said this with the confident authority of someone who had given the matter significant thought. In every movie, the hero always says he's just a regular person, but he's not. Ellie smiled despite himself. "Eat your macaroni. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. Eat." That night, after Liam was in bed, Eli sat on the couch in their small living room and looked at the photograph on the bookshelf. Dana in the backyard of the house they'd rented in Madison, holding Liam when he was 3, both of them laughing at something off camera, the kind of laugh that was caught rather than posed. He'd moved that photo 11 times in the last 3 years. It was always the first thing he packed and the first thing he unpacked. "Different job again," he said. "Better commute, at least." He sat there in the quiet, listening to the radiator knock, listening to the city settle around them. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "This is Eli, Mr. Bowen. My name is Diane Ashby." He was quiet for a moment. "I know who you are. I know you do. I'm calling because I want to be honest with you, and I want to do it without an agenda, so I'm going to tell you up front that I'm not calling to offer you anything. I just wanted to say some things, and I thought you deserved to hear them directly." Ellie leaned back against the couch. "Okay, I read your file this week, your full file, not the employment summary, and I talked to your previous references, and I sat with what you told me in the car." A pause. "You were late because your son needed you. That's not an excuse. That's a reason. And I didn't give you the space to explain it, because I was more interested in making a point than in understanding the situation. That was a failure of judgment on my part, and it cost you something real, and I'm sorry." The apology was simple. No performance in it. He'd heard enough hollow apologies to know the difference. "Thank you," he said. "I also want you to know that I've been looking at how I make decisions. Not just about you. About everything." She paused. 12 people in that room watched me fire you for being late without asking why. I've been thinking about what that taught them. That standards apply to everyone. That I don't listen." She said it plainly. That's what it taught them. And they were right. Ellie didn't say anything. "I'm not calling to ask you to come back," Diane said. "You have a new position, and I'm glad of it. I just thought you deserved an honest accounting. From me directly, not through HR. I appreciate that." A longer pause. Outside his window, a car moved slowly down the street, headlights sweeping across the ceiling. "How's Liam?" she asked. He blinked. "He's good, sleeping better." "Good." She hesitated. "Bay, my niece, she asked about you. She wanted to know if your jokes were always that bad." Ellie felt something loosen in his chest. "Tell her yes. They don't get better. It's a gift." Diane almost laughed. He could hear it, just barely, like something she was keeping on a short leash. "I'll tell her." They said goodnight and hung up. Eli sat in the quiet for a while longer. Then he went and checked on Liam, stood in the doorway listening to his son breathe, and thought that for a day that had started very badly, the week had ended in an unexpected place. Bea recovered. She had nightmares for a while, the kind that come after something real has happened, that are just the brain working overtime, trying to file something it can't categorize. Colette slept in her room for 2 weeks. Devin bought a dog, a goofy lab mix named Pretzel, who solved the nightmares more effectively than anything else they'd tried. Bea told the story of Eli Bowen at school, which meant Devin told it to other parents at pickup, which meant it eventually got to a local news segment on community safety, which Eli found out about when his new coworker showed him a phone clip and said, "Isn't this you?" It was. He looked deeply uncomfortable in it. He said he was just in the right place, which was exactly what Liam had predicted he would say. Diane saw the clip. She didn't reach out that time. She was learning to sit on her impulses, which was, it turned out, harder than anything else she'd attempted in 11 years of corporate management. She had the all-staff conversation a week later. No slides, no prepared remarks. Just the truth said plainly. She had fired a man for being late without asking why. That man had gone on to help protect a child an hour later. She had been wrong about him, and the way she'd been wrong was not a fluke. It was a pattern she intended to break. The room was very quiet. Gerald Firth looked at his notepad. Renata Park, who had been looking at a spot above Eli's shoulder during the termination, met Diane's eyes and held them. After the meeting, Renata knocked on her door. "For what it's worth," she said, "I almost said something that morning. In the room. I almost asked what his reason was. Why didn't you?" Renata looked at her carefully. "Because I didn't think you'd want to hear it." Diane sat with that for a long time. The letters started in January. It was Bea's idea. She had written Eli a thank you note on purple paper with a sticker border in her careful, deliberate 7-year-old handwriting that said, "Dear Mr. Eli, thank you for helping me. I am fine now. I have a dog named Pretzel. I told my mom your jokes." She didn't laugh either, but I think she wanted to. Love, Bea. Colette had helped her address it. It arrived at Eli's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, and he found it on his kitchen table where Liam had left it after collecting the mail. "Dad." Liam held it up. "This is for you." "The writing is very young, it is." Eli opened it. Read it again." "What does it say?" Liam asked. Eli handed it to him. Liam read it with the serious focus he brought to everything. "She has a dog named Pretzel." He looked up. "That's a good name for a dog, it is. Can I write back?" Ellie looked at his son. "What? To the girl. Can I write her a letter? Because her dad helped you, and maybe we could be friends." Liam said this with the simple logic of a 9-year-old for whom friendship was a practical matter of proximity and shared interest, uncomplicated by history or baggage, or all the reasons adults found to make it harder than it needed to be. Eli didn't say yes right away. He thought about it, about Diane Ashby and Hartwell Capital, and all the reasons he'd trained himself to keep clean separations. About Liam's face when he talked about kids at school who had more than they did, and how his son navigated that with a grace Eli himself had not yet managed. "Sure," he said, "we can write back." Liam got his notebook. "Dear Bea, my name is Liam and I am 9. My dad said you were very brave. He said you did everything right. I am sorry you were scared. I was scared once too, and my dad helped me. He is good at that. What kind of dog is Pretzel?" "I like dogs." "Your friend Liam. P.S. My dad's jokes are very bad. He knows this and does it anyway." They mailed it that evening. Bea's response came 5 days later, and then Liam's response, and then Bea's. Diane called Eli in February, not about work, just to call. She explained, doing a thing she'd never been particularly good at, which was calling people without a professional reason to do so. She was trying to practice it. He found this funnier than she expected. "How's the new job?" she asked. "Good. I like the team. The commute's longer, but Liam started a book club at school, and his pickup is at 4 now, so it works." "A book club?" He organized it himself, talked a teacher into sponsoring it. They're reading a fantasy series about a boy who discovers his family can talk to animals. A pause that contains something warm. "He's 9 and he already knows how to build a coalition." Diane laughed. "A real one this time, not the carefully managed kind she deployed in meetings. He sounds like someone who'll be running things someday." God help us all. They talked for an hour. About nothing in particular, his job, her week, a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea fish that had made her feel unexpectedly better about the general difficulty of existence. He told her about the time Liam had tried to build a catapult out of popsicle sticks and launched a grape across the apartment, and they still hadn't found it. When she hung up, she sat for a moment in her quiet apartment and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a conversation with no outcome to manage and no point to make, and that it had been exactly what she needed. The girls met in March. Bea had asked Colette repeatedly whether she could meet Liam in person, and Liam had made a similar petition to Eli with similar persistence, and eventually the adults ran out of reasons to say no that outweighed the children's reasons to say yes. They met at the Children's Museum on a Saturday morning, which was Bea's suggestion because she had strong opinions about exhibits. It was a good suggestion. Eli arrived first with Liam, who had dressed with unusual care and was carrying a small wrapped package. Diane arrived with Colette and Devin and Pretzel on a leash. Devin had won a long-running argument about whether dogs were allowed on Saturdays. Bea saw Liam from across the lobby and ran. Liam, to his credit, stood his ground and caught her hug without stumbling. "You're real," Bea said. "Yeah," Liam said. "You're smaller than I thought." "I'm 7, I know. I'm 9, I know. You said in the letters. What's in the package?" Liam handed it over. Inside was a book, the first in the fantasy series his book club was reading. He had written in the front cover in careful handwriting, "For Bea, you were brave." From Liam, Bea read it. Then she looked at Eli. "Your jokes are still bad," she told him. "They are," he agreed. "Liam told me. In his letter. He's honest. I raised him right." Bea took Liam's hand and pulled him toward the water exhibit. The adults watched them go. Devin shook Eli's hand and said very simply, "Thank you," and Eli accepted it with a nod, the way he'd been learning to accept things without deflecting. Diane stood beside him watching the children argue about something near the water table, some debate about the relative properties of different objects that was apparently very important to both of them. "She's good," Eli said, meaning Bea. "She's better since Pretzel," Diane said. Which Devin knew and I thought was too simple a solution. He was right. I was overcomplicating it. "That happen often?" she considered. "More than I'd like to admit." They sat on a bench while the kids played, and Colette took Devin to look at something across the room, and Pretzel fell asleep on Eli's foot, which felt like a vote of confidence. "I owe you something," Diane said. "You don't a real accounting. Not just an apology call." She looked at her hands. "I've been thinking about what I build, what I actually build, not what I say I build. I say I build strong teams, strong culture, an organization where people do their best work. And what I was actually building was a room where people were afraid to tell me the truth." She paused. Renata Park told me she almost said something that morning. In the conference room, she almost asked what your reason was. She didn't because she didn't think I'd hear it. "Would you have?" The honest answer took a moment. "I don't know. Maybe not then. Maybe now." Ellie was quiet. Pretzel shifted in his sleep, pressing harder against his foot. "What changed?" he asked. "You did. Not in any dramatic way. You just—" She stopped. "You kept being the same person. In the conference room, in the hospital, in the car. You didn't perform anything. You were just exactly what you were, and I kept waiting for some other version to appear, some version that was smaller or angrier or more like what I expected, and it never did." Ellie thought about Dana, who used to say that the most radical thing a person could do was stay exactly themselves under pressure. He'd argued with her about it at the time, thought it was too simple. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're not what I expected either." "What did you expect?" "Someone who wouldn't apologize." Diane looked at him sidelong. "I almost didn't, I know." A slight smile. "That's why it meant something when you did." Across the room, Liam was demonstrating something about water displacement with great authority, and Bea was listening with the focus of someone receiving critical information. Pretzel opened one eye, decided nothing required his attention, and closed it again. "They're going to keep being friends," Eli said. "Those two, yes, which means we're going to keep running into each other. Seems likely." He looked at her. "I don't know what to do with that. Neither do I." She said it plainly, without pretense. "I'm not good at things that don't have a clear structure. Most of the good things don't. I'm figuring that out." They sat in comfortable quiet while their kids worked out some complex negotiation involving a toy boat and the right-of-way on the water table, a negotiation that was concluded, apparently, to everyone's satisfaction. April came, which meant Minnesota finally remembered what warmth felt like. The trees along the parkway went from bare to green in a week, the way they did every spring, like they'd been waiting and didn't want to waste any time. Eli was offered a promotion at the property management company. More responsibility, better pay, still home by 4. He took it. Liam's book club finished the fantasy series and argued passionately about the ending, which Liam said was wrong, and Bea, now an honorary remote member via the letters, agreed with, and their shared stance on this became a foundation of the friendship, the way shared opinions often do. Diane made changes at Hartwell Capital that were slow and imperfect and real. She started asking questions before making decisions. She started asking Renata Park what she thought and listening to the answer. She stopped using visibility as a substitute for accountability, which turned out to be harder than she'd expected and more useful. She told Colette about Eli one Sunday afternoon in the careful, sideways manner of someone who isn't sure yet what they're announcing. Colette said, "I know. How do you know?" Because you called me after you talked to him 3 times this month, and you were in a better mood each time, and you never call me when you're in a good mood, you only call when something's wrong. Colette shrugged. It's nice to be called about the other kind. Diane didn't know what to do with that, which was becoming a familiar feeling, and she was starting to think it might be a good sign. The first time Eli asked Diane to dinner, he framed it very carefully as two people who kept running into each other anyway, and might as well do it intentionally over food. She said yes by saying she knew a place with a good winter menu, even though it was April, and he said that sounded fine, and they both understood they were talking around something. Neither of them was quite ready to say directly. Dinner was easy. That surprised them both. Not effortless. Easy is different from effortless. Easy is when two people have different histories and different habits and different ways of moving through the world, and they decide to make room for each other anyway, and it takes effort, but the effort doesn't feel like a cost. They talked about Liam and Bea, about the property management business and the particular challenges of facilities, work that nobody thought about until something broke. About Dana, a little carefully. About what Diane's mother had said when Diane became CEO at 33, which was, I hope you know what you're trading for that, and which Diane had dismissed at the time and thought about frequently since. They walked along the river after dinner. Minneapolis in April was cold still but not unkind, the kind of cold that felt like an ending rather than a beginning. I spent 3 years trying to make myself smaller, Eli said, after Dana died, easier to manage, fewer moving parts. Just me and Liam in the smallest orbit I could find. Does it work? For a while. He looked at the water. And then Liam started a book club and made a friend through the mail and decided I needed to practice having a social life. And apparently I take parenting advice from a 9-year-old. Diane smiled. He's not wrong. He usually isn't. It's very annoying. She laughed. He looked at her when she laughed, the way you look at something you weren't quite prepared for. I spent those same 3 years trying to make myself bigger, she said. More certain, less permeable. I thought that was what leadership looked like. She paused. I think what it actually looked like was just lonely. Was it? Yes. She said it simply, the way he had learned to say things. Very. They walked a little further. This is the part, Eli said, where I would normally say something self-protective. What kind of thing? Something about how I've got a kid and a complicated schedule, and I'm not really in a position to. He stopped. All the things that are true but are also just ways of saying I'm scared. Are you scared? Thoroughly. She was quiet for a moment. So am I. They stood at the railing above the water. Below them the river moved dark and steady, the way rivers moved, with the patience of something that had decided not to be in a hurry. I'm bad at not knowing the outcome, Diane said. I know. You've noticed. Hard not to. She looked at him. I'm trying to get better at it. I know that too. He held her gaze. I can see it. It's not nothing. They walked back to where they'd parked in a quiet that was different from the earlier kind, fuller somehow, like something had been acknowledged without quite being named, and both of them had decided that was enough for now. September. The leaves in the parkway going gold and orange, Minneapolis doing what it did every fall, making you forget you'd ever been cold. They took the kids to Lake Harriet on a Saturday, which Bea had requested specifically because she'd seen a picture of the bandstand and decided it needed to be visited. Liam had agreed on the condition that they also go to the Natural History Museum afterward, a condition Bea had accepted with the diplomatic ease of someone who had learned that Liam's conditions were usually reasonable. Devin came with pretzel. Colette brought sandwiches. It was one of those days that accumulated without anyone planning it, the afternoon spreading out longer than expected, the kids running ahead on the path around the lake, Pretzel conducting an ongoing and optimistic investigation of every smell within range. Eli and Diane walked behind them. Liam seems good, she said. He is. Really good. A pause. He asked me last week if we were going to get a dog. What did you say? I said maybe, which is the first time I haven't said no, so he's treating it as a victory, is it? Probably. He watched his son race Bea to the next bench and narrowly lose. He also asked me something else. What? Ellie was quiet for a moment. He asked me if I was happy. Diane looked at him, not in a worried way, just casually, like he was asking about the weather. Eli's voice was careful, going slow with it, and I realized I didn't have to think about it. I just said yes. And then he said good and ran off, and that was the whole conversation. He paused. It was the whole conversation, and it was enough. They walked on. Ahead of them, Bea had stopped at the edge of the lake and was pointing at something in the water, a duck, possibly, or some kind of bird she'd decided was significant. Liam stood beside her, looking where she pointed with the concentrated attention he brought to things that interested him. You should know, Diane said, "That Colette has asked me 3 times this month whether we're dating." "What did you tell her?" "That we were figuring it out." "That's accurate. She said that's what people say when the answer is yes, but they're not ready to say it yet." Ellie glanced at her sideways. "She's not wrong," he said. Diane looked straight ahead at the lake, at the gold light on the water, at the 2 children standing at the edge pointing at whatever the duck was doing. "No," she said. "She isn't." They stopped walking and stood there, both of them looking at the same thing, which was their children being children on a warm September day by the water, with no awareness of how close things had come to being different, how many small decisions and one large intervention had led to this exact afternoon, this exact light, this exact and ordinary happiness. Liam turned and saw them standing there and waved. Eli waved back. Bea cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted across the path, "Mrs. Diane, there's a turtle," Diane called back. "I see it." She didn't see it yet, but she would. Bea grabbed Liam's arm and pulled him along the edge to get a better look, and Pretzel pulled Devin in the same direction, and Colette was already taking a picture, and the afternoon settled around all of them like something that had always been going to happen and had finally, on a warm September Saturday, arrived. Later, after sandwiches and the museum and a stop for ice cream that Bea had negotiated successfully, Eli and Liam drove home through the gold September light. Liam was quiet in the back seat in the specific way he got quiet when he was working something out. "Dad, yeah, I like Bea, I know. She likes you too, and I like Ms. Diane." Eli kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah? She's serious," Liam said, with the careful fairness of a born analyst, "but she tries. You can tell when people are trying." A pause. "You like her too? I do. Good." Liam seemed to settle something. "Mom would think she was funny, in a dry way. She would say she has good bones." Ellie's throat tightened. Dana used to say that about people she respected, that they had good bones, meaning something structural, something that held. "Yeah," he said. "I think she would too." They drove the rest of the way home in the easy quiet of 2 people who have said what needed saying and don't need to fill the silence after. At the apartment, Liam went to his room to add to his ongoing comic strip, and Eli stood in the kitchen making tea he didn't need and thinking about what his son had said, about trying, about the fact that you could tell when people were doing it. He thought about Dana, about what she would actually say, which would probably be something direct and a little merciless, because she had been both of those things, and he had loved her for them. "She sounds like trouble," Dana would say. "Good trouble. Don't be an idiot about it." He set down his mug and pulled out his phone. "Good day," he texted Diane. The response came in 2 minutes. "Very good day. Then Bea is already asking when we can go back. Liam is drawing Pretzel into his comic strip. The dog is apparently a main character now. Devin will be insufferable when he finds out." Eli smiled. "Thank you," he typed, "for figuring it out with me." The response took a moment longer. "Thank you for giving it a chance to figure." He put the phone down and looked at the photograph of Dana on the bookshelf. The backyard in Madison, Liam laughing, the off-camera something that had made them both go bright with it. "We're okay," he said. "Me and Liam, we're doing okay." The apartment was quiet around him. Outside, Minneapolis in September hummed and settled and went about its business indifferent and ordinary, and full of people navigating their particular complicated lives as best they could. He went to check on Liam, stood in the doorway watching his son draw with great concentration, tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth the way Dana used to do when she was focused. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to the kitchen to finish his tea, in the good and ordinary quiet of an evening that had nothing wrong with it, which was, he had learned, the whole point.